so much was removed from the Odyssey. Yesterday I went to the cinema to watch the new movie, and well, I didn't really like it. And I'm not talking here about the cinematography or visual effects. Many scenes in the movie actually looked really good. What I really want to point out is how different the narrative, the world building, and the characters were from what we can find in the book. And before you say, oh, it's an adaptation, sure, an adaptation has the right to do its own thing, but only to an extent before the spirit of the original disappears. And during this movie, I didn't really feel the spirit of the Odyssey that I felt when I was reading this book. The movie removed tons of material that, in my opinion, was critical to justifying a lot of the things that happened during the movie and a lot of the things about characters. And I'm not nitpicking, those weren't some small changes here and there, those were huge parts of the story completely removed or irreversibly changed. And in this video I want to show you exactly what I mean by comparing the biggest changes the movie made from the book. But before we start going through the story, first I want to give you some context. I finished reading the Odyssey around 2 months ago. It was the first classic that I decided to pick up in adulthood, and yesterday I watched the movie with my close friend who knows a lot about the cinema, so both contexts are pretty fresh in my mind. Now let me start with what struck me the most at the beginning of the movie. First of all, they completely removed gods from the movie. The only goddess we see is Athena, but even then she doesn't seem to serve any important narrative function. She just appears here and there, and I get the symbolic meaning that she serves, but she doesn't push the plot forward. And honestly, I think you could even remove her from the movie and the plot wouldn't really be impacted. Now, in the original story, gods serve a very vital purpose of pushing the plot forwards. They appear in key moments of the story, and even the inciting incident itself relies on the presence of gods. And that's the main problem in all of this. The Odyssey wouldn't have happened without actions from the gods, and in the movie, that part is completely ignored. The movie doesn't really justify why Odysseus is now allowed to leave this island. The moment is pretty random, that Calypso decides to stop feeding him lotus flowers and Odysseus can finally remember everything. Now, that part wasn't even in the book at all, but it took her 7 years to finally start letting him go, and there was no clear reason for it. Well, in the book, one of the first things we see is Athena going to Zeus to justify that Odysseus should be let go from Calypso's island. The gods are aware that he's stuck on this island, and Athena, since Odysseus is one of her favorite warriors, and it makes a lot of sense since Athena is the goddess of war and wisdom and strategy, and Odysseus is this great warrior who is famous for being very cunning, wise, and a powerful warrior. So it's a perfect match. No wonder that Athena took a liking to him. And so the inciting incident is that Athena notices how much Odysseus is suffering on this island, because in the original Odysseus remembers everything, and the story is much more brutal. He's sort of like a sex slave to Calypso, and during the day he sits on the shore and looks into the horizon and misses Ithaca and Penelope, and Calypso tries to convince him that she can make him immortal too and he can stay on the island forever, and she asks whether his life on the island is actually all that bad. And also on the other end of the world, you can see Penelope every day completely in despair, crying over Odysseus, hoping that he might come back one day. But you also have the suitors who are rowdy, who are destroying Odysseus' house, who are using up all of their resources. And in general, there's plenty of trouble, and Athena notices all of that despair, and that's why she decides that Odysseus has suffered enough, and she's going to make a case for letting him go back home. And eventually Zeus decides that, okay, Odysseus can go back home. Poseidon also speaks out, since he holds a strong grudge against Odysseus for what he did to Polypheme. But eventually Zeus decides that, okay, Odysseus is allowed to reach back home, but he's going to suffer greatly during the journey. But yeah, sooner or later he is destined to get back home. Then in the book, before we get to the retelling of his entire journey, we also see Athena arriving at Telemachus's place, and she takes the disguise of mentor, and she guides Telemachus on his journey and also serves the role of his guardian. So Telemachus sets out on his journey. The biggest change is that Athena is not there, but other than that, it doesn't stray that far from the book. And getting back to what is happening to Odysseus, after he leaves the island on his raft, Poseidon destroys it, and with some help from a minor goddess, Odysseus lands at the shore of Phaeacians. And Phaeacians are those great seafaring people who are very fearful of gods and respecting of them, and with some help from Athena, Odysseus is taken under their care, and eventually they throw a celebration, they give him treasures, and they promise that they will take him back home. And during this celebration, Odysseus retells the entire story of his journey so far. And the journey starts with meeting the Cyclops Polypheme. Now, in this part, there are really important differences between the book and the movie. While I like the design of the monster and I like the setting of the dark cave and a bit of horror, narratively, it didn't land well. Well, in the movie, you see this mostly mindless monster who arrives back at his cave and starts eating people, and there isn't really much more to it. In the book, the Cyclops Polyphem isn't actually a mindless monster, and there is a lot of dialogue between him and Odysseus. And there is a very iconic element where Odysseus tells that his name is Nobody. And later on, he talks with the Cyclops a bit more. The Cyclops promises to eat him the last. And this whole interaction eventually leads Odysseus to come up with this interesting plan of fooling Polyphem. He convinces him to try their famous wine, and eventually the Cyclops gets drunk, and that's why he falls asleep on the floor, and that's why they can take the giant wooden stake and blind his eye. Then the Cyclops can't find Odysseus or his warriors, but the very next day he has to open up the cave because he really cares for his sheep. As I said, he's not a mindless monster, he has very human-like qualities. He even has a favorite sheep, but he still wants revenge, so when those sheep are leaving, he's not just lying there like in the movie, he's actively searching for those warriors, he's trying to find them among the sheep. And in the book, Odysseus comes up with a smart strategy of tying themselves under the bellies of the sheep. And there is a lot of tension whether they will be fine, they really get through by the skin of their teeth. And what happens in the movie, they just tie a bit of hay on their backs and they just walk on their hands and knees. They can pretty much just forget this whole strategy and just circle around the Polyphem's arm. So in the book, this is a perfect situation to showcase how smart Odysseus is. It shows us that Odysseus is cunning, smart, that he can lead his people away from danger. And that's a vital part of his character. Meanwhile, in the movie, everyone just mentions that Odysseus is known for being the smartest general of Agamemnon, but nobody actually shows that. If you watch the movie, think about whether you can point out any kind of situation where Odysseus really showcased his cunning. Other than the Trojan horse, which we don't even see him coming up with the idea, we only see him once the Trojan horse is already completed. Then the movie omits the parts where they land at the Locust Eaters Island, which I don't think is really a crucial part, so I don't mind it at all. And then the people land at Aeolia, the Wind King's Island, and that's where Odysseus receives a bag of winds from the king, and they can use this bag of winds to travel way faster and to sail straight to Ithaca, but his crew doesn't trust him, thinks that maybe he holds some hidden treasure in this bag, and they open it up and the winds go completely wild and they're once again lost at sea. And it's a shame that the movie cut this completely, because I think it does a pretty good job at establishing that Odysseus is the smart leader who should be trusted, but his people are the ones who bring disasters upon themselves. Then we get to the part where they arrive at Circe's island, the witch. And there are a couple of big changes here we should mention. First of all, the dynamic with the crew is a bit different. In the book, Odysseus is still mostly the leader, like some people go ahead, but Odysseus is still respected and he goes hunting by himself, by his own choice, and a lot of the people actually stay to guard the ship. And then he goes to the palace, like it wasn't a small stone hut, it was either a huge house or even a full palace. And then he fights Circe, and since her magic doesn't work, he simply threatens her to undo her magic, and then she gives them supplies and also tells them where they should go next. So once again, I think the book does that way better than the movie. There's also a lot more when it comes to going to Hades, a lot more in the conversation with Circe herself, and also when they arrive there, one of the big parts that were cut is that Odysseus meets the spirit of his mother there, and he finds out that his mother died from grief, missing Odysseus, and this helps us see the pain of going to Troy and how much everyone suffers, not only Odysseus and Penelope, but also everyone around them as a result of this decision. He also meets Agamemnon then, like in the movie, but a small important tangent. I don't understand why they made Agamemnon into this dark, evil knight. And it's like they were going for some kind of dark antagonist, like a very generic dark antagonist, and that's not the role of Agamemnon, and he doesn't really play any part in this movie. He doesn't say much, he doesn't actually do anything. He's just this evil king archetype. And he's just there. And whenever he appeared on the screen, this completely broke the immersion for me because he seems really random. But anyways, let's continue the journey. Scylla and Charybdis were done pretty well. I enjoyed the design of the monster. They got it right with how quickly the heads appear, how disturbing the monster is, and how quickly it grabs the sailors and disappears in the caves in the mountain. When we finally arrived at Helios' island, so the sacred cattle, a lot of the things are similar between the movie and the book, but once again we're missing this mythological aspect of gods interacting with each other. In the book, Zeus doesn't punish those people for killing the cows just because, but Helios is a very important god that plays a very important part in the system, because In the mythology, Helios actually is not only the god of the sun, he also is the sun. So if he stops driving his chariot across the sky, then the sun disappears. And since Helios demands revenge, then Zeus, per agreement, only saves Odysseus and kills everyone else with a lightning strike. And only then in the book does Odysseus land at Calypso's island, while in the movie he suddenly appears at Ithaca's coast. And in the book there is this whole thing with Phaeacians I've mentioned. They're the ones that take him home, and they also give him a ton of treasures because the gods decided that Odysseus is meant to come back home as a victor. But then of course there is this final challenge of the suitors. And unfortunately in the movie this part seemed really rushed to me. But at the same time, there is this whole unnecessary part of people making a meaningless trap at the temple, and the solution to that entire problem is that Odysseus goes after them, and he's such a strong warrior that he defeats everyone easily. And while in the original there was also a trap made by the suitors waiting for Telemachus, in the movie version I don't think it serves any purpose. And this whole part of Odysseus disguising himself as a beggar and talking with Penelope and making this plan of killing all of the suitors, in the book it's much more in-depth, and once again this idea of Odysseus being a cunning, smart warrior is not visible in the movie, at least not to me. Like, sure, he's a powerful warrior, but the idea is that he's just going to go there, shoot them with arrows, and then he's going to fight and defeat everyone somehow. Instead, in the book, he has one support of Athena. She is also responsible for creating his disguise. This is why no one can recognize him. And he also has her protection. So when we get to the final part, after a lot of time where he is strategizing, where he's checking out the entire situation, where he finally shows himself to Telemachus, and where together they plan the entire thing, where they subtly gather weapons into a certain part of the room, where they gather additional support from the swineherd and from, I believe, one other person. And only then, together at the right time, where everything is prepared, only then they fight the suitors. And it's still not an easy fight. Despite Odysseus being a powerful warrior, the reason he really wins is that Athena is on his side. She doesn't physically appear in the fight, but if I remember correctly, she puts fear into the hearts of his enemies. That's why they're running scared for their lives when Odysseus starts shooting. And then when they start fighting back, I think they throw spears at Odysseus and his friends. Athena is responsible for making projectiles miss. And after everything is well and done, in the movie we get to Penelope quickly recognizing Odysseus. I like how the book does it a bit more differently. Like, Penelope still can't believe that this is actually her husband. She still has some doubt because it's been so long, she almost lost all of the hope. And there's this iconic part where she tests him once again by saying something about their bed being moved, but Odysseus built their bed himself, and only he knows that a part of a tree growing in the garden is connected to the entire structure, and it's impossible to move the bed in any way. It's like a minor detail, but it's a very cool, iconic part that really adds some flavor. And by the way, Odysseus' revenge in the book doesn't end with just killing the suitors. The original story is much more brutal because Odysseus takes revenge on all of the disloyal slaves. So all of the slaves that were secretly helping suitors are gathered and hanged. And when I was reading that part, I was like, holy shit, is Odysseus really the good guy? Because for modern standards, this kind of treatment was a bit hardcore. Because it's clearly described how slaves are gathered into the shed and hanged all together at once. It's a bit crazy, but I think the shock value adds to the story. And the final part that is different is the ending. In the movie, Odysseus goes to punishment, and I believe he lives together with Penelope, but in the book he goes to visit his father, King Laertes, and they have their emotional interactions. But then we also have the part where the elders, so the family and the fathers of the suitors, are attacking to take revenge. But that's a really short fight where Laertes kills their leader, and then Athena intervenes and she orders everyone to stop fighting because enough blood has been shed. And then the ending in the book is that Odysseus leaves to fulfill some kind of prophecy, I believe, where he's supposed to carry a wooden oar so far inland where people stops recognizing that it's a part of a ship, and then he's supposed to plant it in the ground and make sacrifices for all of the gods. Now I might be getting this part wrong, so don't quote me on that, but something along those lines happens. And that's where the Odyssey ends. Now I hope this can give you more context for this entire Odyssey discussion that is happening on the internet. You can decide for yourself if you want to watch the movie or if you want to read the book as well. Let me give you a warning. The book is not a novel, it's an epic, and it's composed as something that's supposed to be orally presented to music in a very theatrical way, so it doesn't work as well as a written story. I mean, it's still really cool, it's just difficult to read. because the language and the wording is a bit weird, but if you're intrigued, I recommend you trying it for yourself. And if you want more chill content about books and philosophy, you can follow the channel. And if you want bonus content and to stay up to date with everything I do, there is a link to my Substack in the description. See you guys in the next one.